One of the things that we're always talking about in English is that the most powerful reading is when we connect to a text. And, when I think about text connections, it's so much linked to our passions, our hobbies, the things that we know about. And so I'm trying to always model that for kids. Like how is what we're reading connected to something that I love or something that I've seen in the world? My name is Travis Gasper, and I am the middle school English department coordinator. I am a 6th and 8th grade English teacher, and I am also the AI innovation coordinator for pre-K through 12 at the John Cooper School. As a department, we read a book about deep reading, and it's written by an author who her whole career is studying the brain and what happens in our brains when we read in particular. It's a book called Reader Come Home, and it's fascinating. She starts by really giving an in-depth look at the process our brain goes through when we actually read something, and she proves that it's this incredibly complex process that is really biologically amazing because it is not something that we're born able to do. So it's very different than language. It's not something that we just naturally come to. Essentially, we've hacked our own brains to be able to read and to understand. And so she kind of starts with that and saying this is an amazing thing that we've been able to do that's shaped our human history. And then she starts talking about how we're now in a digital age and how when you're looking at our brains and brain research, we are reading things in incredibly different ways than we used to. And so a fact that stood out to me is there was a study done recently that found that the average human being is consuming 32 gigabytes of information every single day, which is the equivalent of about 100,000 words. So all of us as adults are just being inundated with language. And you could say we're actually reading more than we ever have at any time in history. But what's different is the way that we read. And so there's another study that she cites where they were looking at people in their 20s, and they found that people were switching media 27 times in an hour. So 27 different forms of media, different websites and everything. And that the average person is checking our cell phone like between 130 and like 190 times a day. And so what they're seeing is we're getting all of this information, we're reading more, but we're very distracted in how we read. And we're reading more in like short bursts and not longer sustained kind of deep reading experiences. And so I feel like this is something we know as adults, like we're very aware of this. Like all of us probably in the last year have sat down to read something and then been surprised when we couldn't sustain the stamina or the attention to read it. And so it was really great because it kind of gave name to something that we're already experiencing or feeling. And then thinking about being educators of children, we know how important the deep reading experience is, like how we want kids to get lost in books, and also how books change us as individuals and as humans. That's why everyone who's an English teacher here at the school, they've been changed in some profound way by a work of literature, which is how we all found our way into this profession. And we want that for our kids too. So it's really been thinking about, well, what is the effect of the digital age we're in, and how can we maybe counter some of those effects? What can we do to encourage kids and to have that type of reading experience? In the past, we would kind of have the approach of, okay, like read on a Kindle or reading on a screen. It's still a book. It's still engaging. It's just reading. And in the evidence that she's citing in her studies, it's actually very different. And so one of the differences is when we're reading on a device, they've been studying people's eye patterns. And what they found is that rather than reading kind of across the page like we do, our eyes naturally go into this Z pattern, they call it. And so it's like we're reading the first line, we're kind of zagging down, and then we're reading the last line. And I think that this is something that we're adopting because the media we're consuming online is made to be digested quickly. And our brains just naturally know the most important information is going to be the front and then the end. And then we're just multitasking and kind of, But what she shows is that the more that that's our primary way of reading, we actually transpose that reading habit to reading in a text, like an actual physical book. And so what we see for a lot of our kids is, the stamina of deep reading. It's really hard for them at first because they've trained their brains. If they're reading primarily on screens, they've trained their brains to do this all the time. And so then they do that to a book and they're not getting the same experience. They're not losing themselves in the book. They're struggling to remember what they read. And another interesting thing about digital reading is they said even with a Kindle that's like where you can turn a page, they found in sequencing studies, so like having people read in physical books and then having people read on devices, that the people who read on devices are way worse at maintaining the sequence of what they read. And so there's something about the physical object and like the turning of the page where our brain holds on to the sequence of events more. And I think it's linked to that, how so much of our digital reading experience, it's like scrolling, and it's just harder for our brains to maintain sequence when we're just scrolling through things. So we're kind of looking at it as like reading as an act of resistance to the attention economy, right? So we can't control as educators what the world outside our school looks like, but we do have a lot of control in our classrooms, in the English classroom in particular. And so we're like making it this quiet, contemplative space where kids can actually just read, and there's not a ton of like interruptions to that reading, where they're able to like more and more build up that muscle to get lost in their books. And then the other thing, just in terms of studying novels together, I think that there's a communal element to reading that's very powerful. That's why we have book clubs and why everyone, like so much of our world now, that's where people are reading, is in community with other people. And so there's something powerful when you read work with other people and talk about it and experience it together, and that we're hoping that experience as well makes kids think, oh, this is cool, I like this, I want more of this. Yeah. And it has to be one that's student led and not just the teacher saying, hey, look at this, look at this, look at this, where the kids are discovering it themselves. And so even in 6th grade, it's great, we start teaching them this kind of modified Socratic seminar method that's based on coaching each other. And even my 6th graders, by the end of the year, they're discussing the work that they're reading, but they're also discussing how it's connected to all of the other books we've read this year. So that's part of it, is how are we building this kind of like thematic language throughout the year with all the books, how are they all fitting together? And it's all student led. I just sit and take notes on like the brilliant things that they're saying, and so I can highlight and be like, this was awesome and everything. And they're always coming up with just these profoundly deep insights that are way better than if I would have just been like, this is what this book is about.